AI won't take your job, someone using AI will. You may have heard this phrase last year. If you want a head start into 2024, join the free masterclass on AI and training design, organized by Nuspring in collaboration with leading AI and learning researcher Dr. Philippa Hartman. On Tuesday, February 13, we'll dive headfirst into leveraging AI for designing your training. Visit thenuspring.com or the link in the show notes. Hope to see you there.
AI is a fantastically powerful tool for learning, and you have to use it, or so everyone is telling you. But what are you going to use it for? And how is that going to help your learners?
Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what?
Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool. I'm learning.
Learning is fun.
Knowledge is power. Knowledge. Education.
My guest this time on The Learning Hack thinks that it's really important to know what problem you're trying to solve with AI to use it properly. The problem has to come first. That's why we've called this episode AI, the Product and the Problem. She's one of the smartest people around on the conference circuit, and she has a lot to say about AI and its use for learning. Kate Fitzgerald, Head of Fact, who is she?
Hack Facts.
Egle Vinauskaite is the award-winning director of the learning innovation consultancy Nodes. Her expertise in learning, behavioural sciences and technology has made her a sought-after edtech advisor by top startups and blue-chip companies. With her work spanning AI, XR, mobile, platforms, blended learning programs and more, she understands the ground zero of how AI is ushering in entirely new ways of doing things in the world of learning and edtech.
Everyone wants to know how to use AI wisely and effectively now. It's seen as the key new technology to drive business growth and greater productivity. Egle is one of the top people talking to corporates about using it for learning, and I wanted to hear what she's telling them. I also wanted to hear about her own pretty remarkable journey from Lithuania to Harvard to the UK. Listen in. Egle Vinauskaite, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome to The Learning Hack.
Thanks for having me, John.
I have to thank Kevin Elster for introducing us at a dinner he held in London, following which we had a conversation and decided that we wanted to focus this episode on the product and the problem, which is the title of this podcast. Can you unpack the meaning of that for us? But first, to start with, a confusion of mine about this I've got to own up to. I was really interested yesterday to watch you discussing product mindset with a friend of the podcast, Miles Runham, on YouTube. I think we can have him back on next year as well. But I'm being, to be completely honest about this, I'm not sure exactly what you both mean when you talk about product. And in fact, I've been talking to Miles for almost a year about product mindset on and off. And I think I've been smiling and nodding, but I don't really understand. The product, is it a piece of learning content, a learning system, a learning solution, or all or any of the above?
It certainly can be. It can be either of the above, an actual piece of learning software, a learning solution, a content offering. But at the higher level, when I talk about product in L&D, I mean adopting the so-called product mindset in L&D. And the product mindset is a way of approaching problems by focusing on the customer or the user or the learner, however you want to call it. Because here's the thing, in workplace L&D, one of the biggest, most acute, most common problems that L&D professionals try to solve is engagement. And this comes up again and again in conversations, in surveys, in vendor pitches. And people don't engage with a lot of what L&D is offering. And then we end up in a situation where we throw lots of stuff at the wall. Here's gamification. Here's VR. Here's a video library like Netflix. Here's a nudge engine. And we're hoping that it will finally engage people in learning. But what the product mindset suggests is that we should start with the user. Who is our target audience? What problems are they facing? How can you solve that problem for them? And go from there. So going back to your original question, the answer may be that people need actionable learning content, or a better system that targets that content, or a learning experience that inspires them, or a support system that motivates them. But whatever the solution is, it needs to address a real problem. I always say that relevance is the best engagement tool in learning. And it seems common sense, but this user-first approach is the opposite of the content-first approach that L&D often leads with. So starting with what people need to learn and then trying to find the most palatable way to feed them that information. It's a bit like broccoli dipped in chocolate, if you don't mind me using that analogy. And this is why, when we started discussing me coming onto the podcast and talking about learning technology and AI in particular, I suggested talking about it from the perspective of the product and the problem. Because now that we have this very powerful tool at our disposal, being deliberate about what we use it for is ever more important. If we don't understand what problems we are solving for people, we will end up using AI to scale what hasn't worked before. And at the human level, it will be a missed opportunity with a significant cost to people's careers, to their professional development, and so on. So when the tool can make a difference at so many levels in a learning function and can potentially help solve so many problems, it's tempting to use it for the problems we have already been solving, instead of rethinking whether they still need to be solved. And I understand this is quite vague, so let me make this more specific. For example, there is a particular type of an e-learning course which gives you some information about a skill and then asks you multiple choice questions to decide how you should use that skill. So for example, a branching scenario about having difficult conversations. I think we all know what I'm talking about, this type of course. And in this instance, you can use AI to help you come up with the questions and flesh out the scenario. Sure, but you can also reconsider whether you still need this kind of interaction in the first place, because these kinds of scenarios have been only a proxy for actual skill practice, actual skill development, because they're very structured, they're constrained, you're not answering in natural language, they're leading. So there are a lot of problems with them, but they have been the best that we had with the technology that we had to be able to scale that kind of skill development for people. And if you think about the underlying problem, which is people not being able to have difficult conversations at work, then creating an actual natural language conversation simulator would be a much better use of AI. And that's what I mean when I say that you need to start with a problem, not a tool.
Okay, yeah, so that's pretty understandable. And I'd say I sort of heard this before, and in marketing we call this solutioneering, when someone comes along and says, I need you to do me a brochure about this, that, and the other. And we say, well, how do you know it's a brochure? How do you know it's not a billboard you want, or a TV ad, or whatever? So basically what you're saying is that you start with the problem and then perhaps select the product you need to use after that. So how does AI come into this equation then?
Because as I said, AI is a tool that can do so many things. And if you're not careful, you're going to start solving the problems that you have yourself as a learning professional, as a learning designer, whatever, one of those professions, and not the actual problems that the user has. Meaning that if a person, the problem may be, say, a performance problem. Someone needs to develop a skill to be able to lead a project in a better way, or lead their people in a better way. And this whole conversation about AI is becoming even more relevant here, because this is the kind of technology which is a general technology, meaning that we can use it either for skill development or for content development or for process optimization or anywhere. So we really need to zero in into exactly what problem we're solving with it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my slight confusion there was that I thought I heard you say that you could actually use AI to help you choose which solution would fit the problem. But was that just a misunderstanding on my part?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's certainly not what I meant.
Okay.
Yeah.
But AI definitely widens your options, speeds up your ability to produce something. So it becomes all the more important to focus on the product. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
the problem.
And the thing is,
product.
yeah, exactly. And the thing is that because this technology is really quite powerful, if you use it to solve the wrong problem, you're gonna go way in the wrong direction. Like not a little bit, but just there is a function of just how generalist and how powerful the technology is, and how deliberate you need to be in using it, I think.
Yeah. So if you've suddenly got a really powerful new car that can go a lot faster than your previous old banger, if you don't get the directions right, you can end up going further in the wrong direction than if you stuck with your old banger and poodled about.
Exactly.
Sorry, I'm trying to make it really simple just because of my own confusions. And experience has told me that if I have a confusion, other people have it too.
Go for it.
In your career so far, Egle, you've worked with both providers and corporates, and I've got a sense that the product mindset language is sort of coming from the provider, from the vendor end, rather than, out of the world of kind of training and coaching and so on. And you work both sides. There's a lot of focus currently on how well that interface functions between buyers and sellers in this market space. What reflections do you have on that question, particularly as someone whose first degree was in economics, which I think is really interesting?
Yeah, it does come in handy. There is, I think, quite a painful distinction between what works and what sells ultimately. And this may take us back to your first question about the product and the problem. Buyers often don't know what problem they're solving, and they don't take the time to understand the organizational context of it, perhaps its root cause and component parts. And to top it off, they often don't even have a good grasp on how people learn and how they definitely don't learn. And given this backdrop, I feel that buyers are therefore susceptible to oversimplified solutions that promise to take away their own pain of handling complexity, rather than the pain felt by the users, whatever, learners, employees, whatever you want to call them. So you often end up in this paradoxical situation where some vendors are doing the right thing. They're being careful about the claims that they make. They are developing sophisticated products that look at the solution holistically, not as a silver bullet that we're going to give you this and it's going to solve all of your problems. And they lose the sale to someone who ticks the buzzword boxes and quite often uses some scientific findings stretched way beyond their remit to prove efficacy. I've been seeing that quite a lot, actually. And since our industry also has a problem with measurement, we have a situation where buyers often cannot possibly separate the wheat from the chaff. And I remember once seeing water bottles marketed as gluten-free water.
Yeah, or hydration.
Sometimes, yeah, but it's gluten-free water. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And sometimes our industry feels a bit like that.
Yeah, I think to slightly complicate that picture as well, my experience of working in product companies is that, you kind of have this distinction between suites and point solutions where, people will buy into a huge, great suite, which has kind of LMS, LXP, social features, everything you can imagine within it. And the buyer potentially imagines that's going to take away any problem or solve any problem they have. And then they're just kind of a few months into implementation and they realize it doesn't do something they really need. So they have to get a point solution. But other stuff comes in with the point solution because all the providers want to be big suites. Nobody really wants to be a specialist for the rest of their lives. That's not the way to go and attract investment and so on. that's kind of my feeling about some of the confusion within that sort of buyer-seller interface. Does that resonate at all with you?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think this pretty much the same issue comes up here as well, that if you don't quite know exactly what you're trying to do, you're going to be overwhelmed by choice. And even if you have everything you need on the menu, it is about configuring that LMS or another piece of software in a way that actually works for you, for your organization, for your use case. And I think, again, just buying something that does everything, it may seem like the most straightforward solution, but it's really not.
Yeah, and you talked just now there about how people will kind of stretch bits of science and so on to fit the product features of their particular suite or specialist product or whatever, and that sounds to me like thought leadership, which I think hides a multitude of sins, and I may have committed a few of them myself. So I do thought leadership. How healthy do you think the debate is in terms of vendors advising their buyers and potential buyers, dragging in bits of learning theory, bits of neuroscience, and all the rest of it? Are we really furthering understanding in this dialogue, or is there a lot of disinformation in there?
That's a good question, and something that I have been debating with quite a lot of people. The fact that sometimes it seems, because let me pedal back a bit here. Learning and development is the kind of field, at least in the UK or in Europe, where you don't have a set career path to get into it, meaning that usually you don't get a degree in learning and development. We have obviously CIPD and things like that. You don't have a graduate program. So it's really, a lot of people usually fall into this field. And I feel like there are a lot of unknowns, because there's no almost foundational knowledge that we all agree that every learning professional should know. And that gets us into the situation that you're talking about, where a lot of education is being done by vendors. And a lot of that, I think, is useful because people who are creating these products, they think about products, meaning learning software. They think about learning a lot, and they know about learning a lot. And I think there is a lot to learn from them. However, they also have an agenda, and they massage potentially, like, not saying that all of them, but obviously when you're promoting something, you want to highlight certain features or potential impacts over others. And I think this would be all good if we assume that the buyer side had the knowledge to discern those claims, because then it would be a fair game. Sort of, I tell you what I think about your problem and what solution you should have, and then you have your own point of view, and then we meet in the middle and we hash it out. The problem is that unless you have a strong point of view about the problem you're trying to solve, about what kind of solutions might work, sort of reducing the scope of your exploration in the learning technology market, unless you are in that space and you also know what definitely does not work, you may be really swayed by those claims. And especially when it comes to scientific claims, about how if you use this medium, that's going to help people learn that much better, or that percentage increase your knowledge retention by a certain percentage, or because there were quite a lot of experiments that showed that nudges were effective in influencing behaviors. Now, if we just deploy a nudge engine, then that's going to solve all of your learning problems, because before you have only been doing content, but what you haven't been doing is notifying people about that content. Like that sort of very simplistic interpretation. So I think that's the root cause of it, that there is no agreed foundational knowledge here. So I think it's not so much the vendor's fault. I think that a lot of them are doing good work. Some of them are not, but it is about a discourse, and this discourse is not insightful. Discourse isn't quite possible when some people cannot participate in it, pretty much.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, and I'm slightly biting my tongue on the subject of thought leadership because I don't want to kind of give away too much of, how you would work on that. But as I've come from this from a PR background, I've seen a lot of thought leadership programs where the idea is, and I won't say necessarily whether they're mine or not, where the idea is basically to foreground problems in learning and development generally under the rubric of a kind of general discussion about, let's just talk about the industry, let's not talk about our product, but to foreground the problems there for which your products have a solution, or which your solution has a solution. And it's kind of about getting people in a state of mind, perhaps involving fear and other negative emotions, which will make them take those problems more seriously than they might other problems. And it's quite possible that actually there are other problems that are more serious in actuality. And then at the end of the wonderful discussion about the state of the industry, lo and behold, you have a product that kind of solves it all, and everything's hunky-dory. So I think I've already given away far too many of the secrets of thought leadership. Maybe we should move on.
The Learning Hack podcast is supported by Learning News, the learning sector's newswire. Rob and his team are good friends of the podcast, and we really value the help and advice we've had from them, and they do a great job. For the very latest news from around the learning sector, for interviews with learning leaders, the latest from learning sector vendors, and features on workplace learning, go to learningnews.com. I want to talk a little bit, takes back to that video where you were interviewed with Miles, and you were a little unwilling at the time, and this was kind of quite earlier in the year, around middle of the year, to get into the subject of generative AI, because you said it was too soon to talk about it, which I absolutely respect as a point of view. Everybody was still kind of getting used to the idea of it. I know you've talked to and listened to a lot of people since then about AI. And I'm also aware that we have a release coming up in between us recording this interview and when I can publish it out that might change everything. But with those caveats in place, what can you say about generative AI in particular now, and how's it's affecting L&D? Long question, sorry.
Yeah, that's going to be a long answer as well.
Good.
So the conversation that you are referring to took place in March 2023, I think. Yeah. So that's a decade in AI years. And that was just around the time that L&D recognized that ChatGPT was not a drill, pretty much. Over half a year later, and AI is the hottest topic on any education and L&D stage. And a few themes are emerging clearly. The first one is more people are talking about it than using it at scale. A lot of L&D professionals have tried it or use it in either a limited capacity at work or only in a personal capacity. But you would be surprised by how many people are only now taking the first steps. How do I begin is still a very hot question. So just want to situate us in this context that although it seems, if you go to any conference, that people are falling over themselves to advance their AI strategy, the absolute majority don't have anything like that yet. The second thing that's become clear from my conversations with various learning leaders is that AI adoption in L&D is largely driven by the organization's AI strategy. It rarely comes from L&D itself. So it's not L&D leading the AI adoption, which is also a helpful perspective when we hear a lot of conversations about how L&D should just carry the torch, and what it should do with its AI strategy. It's just a small part of a much bigger organizational strategy, and because of the complexities and various considerations of implementing AI at the organizational level, obviously L&D cannot be the first or only department doing it. Right. Then another thing which I found interesting but not surprising is that the most popular use case of AI in L&D is content creation. We did a little research survey asking a lot of people across the industry about how they used AI, both generative AI and what I call regular algorithmic AI. And that came across really clearly. And even anecdotally, if you look across the industry, seemingly every vendor now offers a one-click course creation button. Plenty of learning teams use generative AI for text, image, and video content creation, as well as translations. It's being used both for high-level learning design and for creating things like learning objectives, quiz questions, scripts, and scenarios. So it's really, when it comes to content creation, it seems to be the primary use case, which is, when you think about where L&D spends a lot of its time, that's really not surprising, because these are the most time-consuming tasks, but also what content creation is part of, a huge part of what L&D does in general. But yeah, so content creation is, we can actually talk about that, what it means to use AI for content creation, and where that might take us, and whether that fulfills the promise of AI in learning, so to say. So I'm just going to tease that a little bit. And if we look at the landscape right now, some generative AI applications in learning are already getting commoditized. So course creation helpers, coaching bots are now quite difficult products to differentiate in the market if you are a startup creating that sort of thing. And generally speaking, a lot of people feel overwhelmed by the variety of AI applications on the market, learning or not, which makes it that much more intimidating to dip your toes in it. It feels like there is just so much to catch up on. Even I personally feel it. If I take a few weeks off AI, it's like a whole new world once I dive back in. And the final point that came across quite clearly, both in our survey and just in pretty much any conversation I'm having with people, is that almost everyone feels like they are barely keeping up and are always behind. For your listeners, if that's you, just know that you're not alone. This is a shared feeling. So to sum it up, this whole AI and learning field is very unwieldy. First of all, we have generative AI, which is new and hot, and we have algorithmic or discriminative AI, which has been around for a while in the form of adaptive learning, content curation, and things like that, matching. Then another layer is that we have the term AI being used to discuss both business strategy and the most minute details of content creation, which makes it confusing and difficult to understand its true value in your own context, because you have both a copywriter or a learning designer talking about AI and learning, and then you have a head of learning or a business leader talking about using AI and learning. So it's really quite difficult to parse out that whole conversation. It feels like it's a big blob. And then finally, we have the bigger question about what generative AI is going to do for learning in general. Because I personally think that it has the potential to be a revolutionary technology, both for performance support and for skill development. And I wish we talked more about its tutoring, upskilling, and performance support capabilities rather than firing up those content engines.
That's such an interesting answer, and so many different points in there. Just to give a couple of reactions to that. The fact that it's the organization pushing AI, not L&D specifically, is something I think I know I've seen before with other introductions of new technologies. I think it kind of happened with things like sort of Slack and Teams coming in And everybody said, oh, yes, this is where we need to, not in the LMS, we need to put the learning into those platforms, because that's where the users are, be where the users are. But it was reactive in terms of L&D. And so many other technologies that have come up, L&D is late in adopting. And there has always been a lot of slagging off of L&D because of this technology lag compared to other parts of the organization. My views changed about that. I think, for L&D, it has a lot of other kind of boxes to tick, if you like, with any new technology, because it is responsible for people's personal development. It's part of HR, where very focused on the people function, as we used to say. It has to know that this technology is not going to be worse for people than it is good for them. And in a way, it's not a surprise that the initial reaction has been one of recoil. On the other hand, having said that, I had a really good experience over the last couple of weeks. I went to, well, good and bad. I went to one forum week before last in London, where there was a keynote on AI. By the end of it, everybody is in despond and gloom, because it was kind of, robots are going to take over all your jobs, put you out of a job. If you're lucky, you'll get universal basic income, more likely nothing. And a young 20-something on the table I was sitting there with a very experienced older guru from L&D, and the very young person. The young person was kind of, her eyes were wide with kind of fear and panic, and said, "This is awful. Is this what's going to happen?" And then the older guy and me shook our head and said, "No, 70% of that was bullshit." And I think there are too many of these, as a personal point, so there are too many of these AI keynotes, which is basically people scaring people about AI. However, the week after, I went to a completely other conference in Berlin, which I think was more kind of cosmopolitan, should we say. And you saw at that a far more kind of open and engaged and detailed and specific set of conversations about AI. Okay, how can we use it? Where are the benefits? What are the best ways of using it? None of these as incisive as what you've just given us, but certainly on the way. And, so I did feel cheered that perhaps people are beginning to take it on board and understand it a bit more, rather than just kind of completely rule it out of court and try to ban it from the beginning. Did you want to say more about the content creation aspect?
The content creation aspect is something that, again, I recognize that content is necessary to support, most often necessary to support learning. And this is not going away. It's not shameful to create content and to use AI to create content if you use it in a smart way. But I do think that we in the industry have a bit of a content addiction problem, where it seems that throwing content at anything is the way to go. And what AI has done, because that's the thing. When ChatGPT first arrived, and keeping in mind that learning and development, as well as education more broadly, this entire learning-related industry, it is very much based on content. A lot of what we do, a lot of what we produce, a lot of how we assess is based on content. And when ChatGPT arrived, we had two ways to go forward. One way to go forward was to use it to create more content and pretty much use all of these powerful capabilities to speed up what we have done before. And then the other way would be to stop and think that, okay, so now that content is ubiquitous and is going to become even more so as we go forward every month. It becomes more contextual, better, more accessible, and so on. So how do we reimagine our place as educators in the broadest sense, in any context, in schools and in universities, in workplaces, in that context of ubiquitous content, how do we reimagine our role in it? So I think that when I lament the use of content or the use of AI to produce content, I'm a bit sometimes concerned that we don't think enough. We're sort of like your analogy about a very fast car. We got into that car and we're driving fast, really happy that we now can produce that much content. We can cut our production times by 50, 60, 80%. But we're not really thinking whether this is something that we should be doing. And even at the higher level, what's going to happen in a year, in 2 years? Like, what is our job? What is our purpose? I sometimes go deep with these things, as you may notice. But yes, these, I think, are the more fundamental questions. It feels like we are, as an industry, latching onto the first low-hanging fruit instead of thinking, like, what kind of a tree is this?
Yeah. So some people say, if we want to move away from kind of throwing content at people and use AI to do that, some people say the important thing that it gives us is the ability to put dialogue into the learning process. So when I say some people, really, I mean Donald Clark, my co-host on Great Minds on Learning. We delivered a live podcast about the theoretical underpinnings of generative AI recently, and his strong message from that was, going back to Socrates, learning is about dialogue and about conversation, and this ChatGPT thing has basically kind of grown out of what's essentially a bot, a chat bot. We've had those for ages, and they've been a bit primitive. Now, at last, there's the possibility of them being far more sophisticated. Is that what you're thinking about when you say, let's not just use it to produce more and more bland content?
Yeah, exactly. And it's either again, the bot and the interface. This is the general interface that can be used for many purposes. So one of these purposes is, as you say, a dialogue. Perhaps if I'm having a conversation, a natural language voice conversation with a bot about something that I'm interested in, it's much like having a conversation with someone who is knowledgeable, who is an expert or has an interesting point of view. So it really makes that knowledge acquisition much more personalized, interesting, and something that I can totally imagine that people learn to really enjoy. And actually, this is something that has come up in my own research, is that a lot of people are using AI as a thought partner. So if I'm, for example, as a vendor, if I land a project which has a focus on a specific subject matter, I use AI to help me think through it. So it's not just like I Google an article about, okay, so what are the negotiation tactics, right, to create some sort of negotiations training. I use AI to help me understand why some methods work and some don't. What's the nuance? What are the contextual factors? So I'm actually having a conversation with it as if it was a knowledgeable expert. And that's a very different, I agree with Donald that this is a very different way of relating to content. We are seeking it out and we are getting it in a way that has not been accessible before. So that's one use case for, say, knowledge acquisition. And obviously that activates all sorts of learning processes, which we don't need to go into that right now, which passive content consumption does not. And the other potential use case of the same chatbot interface is for upskilling. So it's not knowledge acquisition, but it's actually me having practicing certain skills, and let's use the term deliberate practice of the chatbot actually enabling me to deliberately practice certain skills. Obviously, some of them are conversational, but with its vision capabilities, it can become much more. It will be able to give feedback on a lot of skills that are not conversation based, so to say. So yeah, I definitely agree that this is one of the big things that generative AI is giving us. Yes.
We're going to have to close up because of time. Fascinating stuff, and we could talk a lot further about this. But before we go, I just talk about your interesting biography. What can you tell us about your journey in the learning industry, from Lithuania to Harvard to the UK? And what particular slant or insight do you think that gives to your view of learning?
Well, thank you for the question, first of all. This is something that really I don't get asked about a lot, so this is going to be fun. So before there was Lithuania to Harvard, there had been finance to learning. So I studied economics and I started out in finance until I realized that I had a deep interest in people and behavior and decided to do that instead. And I vividly remember my quarter life crisis. It was agonizing, but had to be done. And once I dipped my toes in the learning and social impact space, which was in the beginning not workplace learning, I realized how woefully unqualified I was and how little my lived experience of formal education mattered. So I chose this field led by a strong sense of purpose, and I realized that my work could not have an impact unless I knew until I knew what I was doing, and I could even make things worse if I wasn't careful. So I went to Harvard to study human development and earn my stripes, so to say, and came to the UK and ended up working on a whole variety of learning projects, programs, products, you name it, both in corporate L&D and in the learning B2C space. Looking back, I'm really quite fortunate to have had that kind of exposure, because at first it happened accidentally. So yeah, really feel quite lucky. But I remember how surprised I was that L&D does not measure ROI. As a former financial analyst, that absolutely blew my mind. But I haven't abandoned my past life, I would say. I still love Excel. I still love data. I still love frameworks. And as someone who spent years drawing curves and contemplating the societal impact of policies, I like to view learning from that high-level lens, that what we do in this industry matters for the individuals and the collective, and we should approach our work as such.
Good answer. Along the way there, you worked a bit in immersive learning, VR. The metaverse was big last year, not so much in 2023, kind of fell off a cliff. Do you think it might be due for a resurgence in the new year?
I don't know what can knock off AI off its throne as the next big thing. The issue with the metaverse in learning specifically is that more often than not, it's offering a marginal improvement in the experience for a step change in price. It's not a good combo. And it's not solving an obvious problem, or at least a problem that people see as particularly painful, or if they see it as particularly painful, it doesn't solve it in a way that addresses that pain sufficiently. So it's not a great combo again. So for learning purposes, people can collaborate in more user-friendly spaces. Frankly, most people just don't love the metaverse as it is right now. And if it resurfaces, I think it will be because of an improvement in the technology that's significant enough to inspire imagination again.
I think that's a very insightful answer. And it kind of makes me surprised you're not working for a VC. But please stay in our industry because we need your expertise and everything. Finally, you become well respected as a thought leader in the industry, but where do you look up to and follow? Where do you draw inspiration?
That's actually not an easy question to answer. Ethan Mollick comes to mind as someone who prompts me to reflect on education, on work, on society, on AI as well. But he's a recent inspiration rather than the main one. And for me, and this is going to be probably I cannot give you specific names, but it's just that the general approach that I use is that inspiration usually strikes me in conversation with other people, and they don't have to be thought leaders. There is something about people asking you questions and you listening to their points of view that sparks ideas. And I love these serendipitous moments on LinkedIn that end up as a conversation or even a coffee. And if I have a question, I also have a circle of people I reach out to mull over it just for the sake of it, just to discuss that topic or that friction. And I would like to encourage more people to be curious about the people that they connect with, because there's a treasure trove of knowledge and insights in each of our networks. So that would be my potentially avoidant answer, but that's the honest one.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's especially when you're in a kind of an emergent space, like, you know, learning and AI, there aren't any fixed authorities really. So it's more about talking to a lot of people with a lot of different perspectives, I suppose, and people you know to be kind of, you know, not full of bullshit, but who know what they're talking about and compare and contrast. Anyway, thank you very much, Egle, for coming on the podcast. I could talk to you all day, but we have to keep these things to a reasonable length. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you so much, John. It was a pleasure.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to our guest and to our sponsors. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. If you want to help others find us, please like, follow, rate, review, and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube.
If you're interested in getting transcripts for these episodes, ad-free listening, and bonus content, head over to our Patreon page and help to keep the flame alive. Until next time.
Stay curious, learning people.